Welcome to Out and Back, another TJM equipped full drive adventure designed to encourage you to experience all that off-roading has to offer. On this expedition, we're heading to the world's largest sand island and off-road paradise, Fraser Island, on Australia's Queensland coast. We're starting our journey at the old Calandra Lighthouse and driving over 400 kilometres to the Sandy Cape Lighthouse at the very tip of Fraser Island. We're going to be doing whatever we can to stay off the bitumen on this trip. We'll be putting these vehicles through the toughest off-roading situations we can find. We'll be hitting the soft sand of Fraser Island and more than likely getting stuck. And I'm going to show you the deepest freshwater crossing Fraser Island has to offer. So let's get started. We're going to backtrack 40 kilometres from Calandra to a little-known maze of bush roads to hone our skills and put the vehicles through their paces in preparation for the challenges ahead on Fraser. First destination is the Glasshouse Mountains. I know of some tracks out there that are really going to test the vehicles. Steep inclines, really steep descents, big ruts. Our wheels are going to be popping miles up in the air. And speaking of challenges, I've got my old mate coming along, Don.
Hi, I'm Don. I'll be joining Toby just to keep him honest. I'll be seeing him at the Glasshouse Mountains.
Just 45 minutes from Calandra is one of southeast Queensland's greatest landmarks and where our four-wheel drive adventure will really begin.
Just have a Captain Cook out there at the Glasshouse Mountains. So named in 1770 by Captain Cook, who thought they resembled glass houses from back in England. Don't know if there's any rum involved with that decision-making process, but what they really are is the solid volcanic plugs at worn-out volcanoes.
We've got the two four-wheel drives on this trip, the Toyota Trip Carrier and the Mitsubishi Triton. Both have been fully decked out with all the latest gear from TJM. Now granted, these two vehicles don't really compete with each other on the market, but seeing we've got them both on this trip, we'll give you a little bit of a comparison as we go along. And I'll be honest with you right from the get-go, I'm very glad to be driving this one because where we're heading right now, the Trippy really is going to be superior to the Triton, just purely because of the reason it's going to have a lot more ground clearance. It's got the front and rear diff locks, whereas the Triton's only got the traction control. And Don's driving it. What's going on here?
Mate, lack of clearance.
The Toyota Trip Carrier is one of the last remaining true off-road vehicles you can buy new. It's got the freewheeling hubs up front, live axles front and rear, and it only comes with a manual transmission, so it is very old school. But where we're heading to today, it's ideally suited to that sort of low range work. It's got the TJM lockers front and back, whereas the Triton, on the other hand, it's automatic, it relies on traction control. If you're a novice who hasn't done a heck of a lot of four-wheel driving, be significantly more capable in the Triton. Before we push the vehicles through the dirt, we need to loosen Donny Boy up with a run to the top of one of the glass houses. Well, this is the base of Mount Tippergargan, and we've got three climbs to choose from to get up to the top. Now, this one here, Class 5, I've done this one before. It's a piece of cake, Don, don't worry. Only takes 3 to 4 hours, 3 kilometres.
Stop right there. High fitness levels, rock scrambling and rock climbing skills.
Yeah, but they set the bar very low.
Mate,
it's not for athletes like you.
Have you seen my CV lately?
Like steel. Let's go, come on.
Grey Nomad, drives his desk
You'll
at
be
high
fine,
speed.
come on, we'll see how far up we can get. Don't let the taut car keys fool you. Don rockets his way up the hill faster than a speeding bullet. And before you know it, we're at the first viewing platform to be greeted by an old Aboriginal legend. And this whole area belongs to the Gubbi Gubbi people. Now, there is a story behind the Glasshouse Mountains and Mount Biawar, which is just behind me. Basically, it goes a little bit like this. Mount Tippergargan is the father of the Glasshouse Mountains. And one day he was looking out to sea and noticed the ocean rising at an alarming rate. So he turned to his eldest son, Mount Curwin, and asked him to help his pregnant mother, Mount Biawar, out in this sticky situation. Coonerwin, however, was terrified and did a runner, and his father was so aggravated by this, he actually chased his son down, hit him so hard over the back of the head, it dislocated his neck. After the water subsided, Coonerwin went back to his father and begged for forgiveness, but the tribal law wouldn't allow this. So to this day, Coonerwin looks out to sea and cries out the many streams and creeks you see around the Glasshouse Mountains today. Coonerwin, well, he's still got a crooked neck, and the mother behind me, well, she's still pregnant, because it takes a long time to give birth to a mountain. Just ask Don. It's not long before we get our tyres wet with one of the many creek crossings. And even though we're on dirt, Don and I have already reduced our tyre pressure to about 20 psi. Just like on sand, this helps to lengthen the tyre's footprint and gives us a lot more traction off-road. Some of the tracks around here are extremely steep and really narrow. So if you're going down one and you're not sure what's at the bottom, you can't really turn around. So it's always a good idea to leave someone back up at the hill. In this case, I've got Don up there just in case I run into trouble. And the hill I'm going down does turn out to be a dead end, and I don't really have much room to turn around. But once I've got it pointing in the right direction, instead of driving up, it's a great opportunity to show you how to winch. Winching can be dangerous, so make sure you know how to operate one safely and use all the precautions. Winching puts a fair amount of strain on your car's batteries. In fact, it puts a heap of strain on them. So you need to make sure when you're winching that you've got the engine of your car running. You might even like to use the throttle a little bit and get the revs up a bit higher to help get that charge through. Once the Troopy's got itself to a point where it can drive on its own accord, we can disconnect the winch and move on to some even steeper descents. The best way to go down hills is to make sure you attack them head on. Don't ever try and go down a steep hill on an angle, because that's just a recipe to flip your vehicle. Now the next thing, if you've got a vehicle like this one where it's got a big diesel and it's a manual transmission, they've got phenomenal engine braking. So first gear, low range is the gear to use. And what I'm doing now, I am using the engine braking, but I'm feathering the brakes just for this first little bit. Once I'm through that, then I can let go of the brakes and let the car do its thing. Now if your vehicle does go into a slide and you lose the ability to steer, you have to accelerate. It's a little bit daunting, but it's the only way you'll regain the ability to steer. And as they say, what goes down must go up, just for fun. So now typically second and third gear low range are your hill climbing gears because they give you a nice blend of momentum and control. I'm doing this in first gear low range just so I can show you where the car would stop with no momentum. So right now I'll sit here, my wheels are turning, and the other one that's got the traction isn't doing anything, and it won't be going anywhere. If I engage the front and rear pro lockers and do the same hill, attacking it at the same speed, I should be able to crawl right through it and make it look like a piece of cake. The great thing about diff locks is, even with a wheel popping miles up in the air like that, you don't freak out because you're not doing 1,000,000 miles an hour. And the other good thing about them is that you don't need to attack things with reckless amounts of momentum. And the other great thing about them is it makes you look like an awesome driver. Now it's Don's turn. He's one of the select few off-road drivers who occasionally forget to put their four-wheel drive into four-wheel drive.
What we're going to do now is take it out of two-wheel drive and try our luck.
Knowing Don as I do, I don't think that's going to be much help.
Toby, do you care to have a go?
Okay, old fella, let's just check it's not the driver that's the problem.
By all means.
Should never trust a man that had it in two-wheel drive. Now, that Trooper that I'm driving before, that's pretty much Arnold Schwarzenegger on wheels. It's big, it's mean, and it's really, really capable in the rough stuff. In a comparison perspective, the Triton's more of a Anthony Kalia on wheels. But if you know how to really get up it, it might just make it up the hill. Unlike a car with diff locks, the Triton needs a certain amount of wheel spin for the traction control to kick in and give power to the wheel that has got any traction, but give it another crack. Oh, young people power.
You got to give it to the youth. Oh, the shame of it all.
Don't feel too bad, Don. It's only because of my young person's vision that I can still see where I'm going. Juiced up on adrenaline, we're heading 180 kilometres north towards our goal and the jump-off point for Fraser Island, Inskip Point. Unfortunately, to save some time, we're cheating and using the highway to relieve the pressure on Don.
I've never been past Nagala Rocks before on Fraser, so I guess I'm a Sandy Cape virgin. But I'm looking forward to it because I reckon there'll be some cracking four-wheel driving. Got a bit of a problem though. I think my handicap is my way of 2 metres of tuned string. His name's Toby.
Hop out of the car, we'll see if we can get you going again.
Are you having a go at me?
Just only a little bit. About halfway up my leg, which doesn't look that deep, but on Don, that's about here.
So we'll have to see how that works out.
Inskip Point is the gateway to Fraser. and a very short barge ride across the water to the bottom tip of the island. Fraser is World Heritage listed, and you'll need a permit from National Parks and Wildlife before driving there.
It takes 3 hours to drive up here and about 3 minutes to get over to Fraser.
Yeah, it's pretty quick on the barge, isn't it?
As soon as we're off the ferry, we're in very soft sand because of the constant flow of traffic churning up the beach. Plenty of drivers get stuck right here, so be sure to engage four-wheel drive before tackling the sand. We've just got off the barge and here's our very first dingo. Now, on your travels to Fraser Island, if you don't see a dingo, consider yourself to be really unlucky because they can be found all over the place. While dingoes are declared pests throughout Australia, the Fraser dingoes are regarded as part of the island's ecology and therefore protected by law. As dingoes on the mainland become more inbred with domestic dogs, the Fraser dingoes may become the purest strain in Australia. But beware, they're wild animals and can be dangerous. Stretching over 120 k's in length, Fraser is the world's largest sand island, and we're heading straight up the eastern beach. This is one of Australia's most popular four-wheel driving destinations, with people coming from all over the world. I used to work as a guide here, so on this TJM adventure, I'm going to take you away from the crowds and show you some of the more secluded and remote areas that Fraser has hidden away. Our first detour inland is at Dilli Village. Fraser sits on top of a huge underground water table, some 30 metres below sea level, which helps these magnificent rainforests to thrive growing on sand. This is the only place in the world where you'll find tall trees growing on sand dunes and reaching elevations of over 200 metres. Some of the water that supports this incredible ecology can take over 100 years to filter through the sand from the water basin below. On many of these inland tracks, you'll also pass some of the most pristine freshwater streams and crystal clear creeks. At the southern end of the island, you'll find the world's largest Perch Lake. Spreading out over 200 hectares, Lake Bermijan is absolutely massive. Perch lakes depend on rainfall to maintain their water levels, but there are over 100 freshwater lakes to choose from. Some are tea-coloured from the surrounding vegetation and called black lakes, while white lakes are clear and blue with white sandy beaches, some offering visitors safe environments for swimming. And I'm never one to miss the opportunity to take a dip, even if the water is slightly chilly. Back on the east coast, 75 Mile Beach is Fraser's version of the Pacific Highway, where all state road rules still apply. Watching a speed limit is just as important as watching for the fishermen crossing the sand. During peak season, you'll see literally hundreds of people fishing from the beaches as the waters off the coast abound with many different varieties of pelagic fish like mackerel, trevally, barracuda and schools of reef fish. There's always a plethora of turtles during the mating season, including these endangered loggerheads. But if you're a diver, you might also enjoy an encounter with these beautiful manta rays, which always seem to be extremely inquisitive and put on such a graceful underwater flying display. Sharks are never far offshore in Fraser, so always be on the lookout, as well as for the fishermen at the water's edge. And something else you should watch for are the many freshwater streams that consistently cut across the sand. There are a heap of creek crossings on Fraser Island and most of them are pretty straightforward. You usually find that the best place to cross them is close to the salt water where it's at its smoothest. But if you do find one that's caught you by surprise and there's a big drop-off, what you can do is hit the brakes, lose as much momentum as possible, but before you take the plunge, let go of the brakes. That allows the suspension on the front of the full drive to reset itself, so you've got more suspension travel, so it'll absorb the blow a little bit better. The fresh water gives us a great opportunity to give the underside of the cars a good flush before we leave the popular eastern beach and head across the island to the rarely visited western side. This is one of my favourite parts on Fraser because of its seclusion. There are a couple of tracks to choose from to get you over to the western side of Fraser Island. Now, most of them are around that 15-kilometre mark, which doesn't sound that far, but it does take a long way because the tracks are really quite slow going. But it's worthwhile doing because once you get on the other side, you've usually got the place to yourself. Whilst the beach driving on the eastern side of Fraser Island is pretty straightforward, here on the western side it's completely different. The sand here is often extremely boggy and very unpredictable. So if you're travelling in just the one vehicle, it might be a spot where you want to drive above the high tide mark just in case. If you have got someone else travelling with you, get them to drive a little bit further back than they normally would. Just in case you get stuck, they'll be on nice hard sand to help recover you. So how do you predict whether sand's soft or not if you haven't got anyone else's tracks to follow? Well, there's a couple of giveaways. If you can see shells sitting on top of the sand, that's usually a sign that it's relatively firm. If you can see soldier crab holes, that's also another sign that the sand is relatively firm. If you don't see any of that, and it's nice powdery stuff, it's usually soft. You can also get that white sandy cover over seaweed, and it can be 3 feet deep, and you drive into that and then you're really in big trouble.
What's going on here?
Mate, lack of clearance.
Lack of clearance? Looks
Yeah.
like someone's had a few too many Christmas puddings.
You having a go at me?
Just only a little bit. I'll get the snatch and strap, we'll pub you out in no time.
Toby, I give you a hand, except I'm finely balanced here and I have to stay here and watch it.
Finally balanced, all right.
Like any sort of recovery, there's no need to race. I'm going to take it off nice and slow to begin with. If that works, beautiful.
Thank you.
You're heavier than I gave you credit for. I was trying to snatch out the Mahino. There you go, Don.
Thanks, mate.
Remember, safety is paramount, so take your time, especially with the elderly, because people like Don, but remember, it's not a case of bragging or showing how much testosterone you have, even though Don needs some. This guy's flat out walking around without a Zimmer frame.
The next challenge is a Wynya Creek and deep fresh water.
A Wynya Creek can fluctuate a fair bit in depth. So, like any water crossing, if you're not sure of the depth, it's best to walk it first. It's winter time at the moment, so I think I might get Don to do this water crossing.
Mate, I'd like to, but I've done my boots up too tight. I can't undo the knots.
You mean you can't see your boots? All right, okay, it looks like it's me. A Wynya's got a couple of semi-decent holes in it at the moment, and this one is just about halfway up my leg, which doesn't look that deep, but on Don, that's about here.
That may be, but from where I stand, the only log in the river is you. One of the rules with water crossings is, if you can't walk it, you can't drive it.
So I'm in second gear low range, which is usually a pretty good gear to choose for water crossings, and I'm about to go into the hole. It's just gone over the bonnet, so I think Don will have a bit of a fright in the Triton. And once you've reached the other side, just stop the vehicle, let all the water drain from it and back into where it belongs. And keep in mind when you go to drive off that your brakes might be a little bit spongy and won't work as well as normal. If you want to get them working quicker again, just ride them slightly on the drive back.
Because we can't get to the Sandy Cape from this side, we have to head back to the eastern side. These tracks cut their way through incredibly beautiful scenery before spitting us back out at Eurong, where we can fuel up for the challenges ahead.
It doesn't matter what vehicle you drive, if you're going through soft sand, your fuel consumption will increase dramatically. And even though the Troopy here's got a 4.5 litre turbocharged V8 diesel, its fuel consumption is actually pretty good for its size. The Triton, on the other hand, has a 4-cylinder diesel, and in these sorts of conditions, it'll have way better fuel economy.
Not many people venture where we're going to the northern tip of the island because of the challenges that lie ahead and the tides. Generally speaking, the further north you go on Fraser, the more remote and difficult the forward driving becomes. The Indianhead Sandblow is one of the most popular spots on Fraser to see people getting stuck, and I've learned a few good tips over the years from experience. The best way to take off in soft sand is nice and slow. Just let those wheels turn over until they climb up on top of the sand. And once you're moving, if you feel your vehicle starting to slow down again, often backing off on the throttle will help because it allows your wheels to climb back on top of the sand again. And something else that may help is sticking to existing wheel tracks. With the Sandblow safely conquered, it's not far from Fraser's most challenging obstacle course, Ningala Rocks. A formidable rocky outcrop that can completely encompass the entire beach, making it impossible to get around. If you're up for it, this is a forward driver's heart-stopping moment.
The Sandy Cape has its own unique sense of isolation, and to a large degree you can thank Ningala Rocks for that, because a lot of people don't want to come down here because they might damage their vehicle or get stuck with an incoming tide, but that's what makes it so much fun.
Both South and North Ningala Rocks are made up of coffee rock. This slippery surface can easily have a vehicle slide off and onto a ledge, causing significant panel damage. To help avoid this, stick to existing wheel ruts, which tend to act a bit like train tracks, stopping the vehicle from sliding sideways. With plenty of ground clearance, the trooper can make it down this ledge pretty much straight on. But by comparison, Don's vehicle has limited ground clearance, so when he tackles this same section, he'll have to do it on a slight angle. Having a second person to help navigate vehicles around tricky sections is always really handy, especially when you've got Don behind the wheel, because who knows what could happen.
Hey, start coming in. Yep, keep coming. Now steer that way. Beautiful.
Don is obviously more comfortable with hard rock than soft sand, but we're about to hit another notorious sand patch that we'll put him to the test. And it's not far in before he needs another snatch.
You got stuck again, Don.
Mate, I've got it right up to the gunnels.
Sometimes I reckon you do this stuff on purpose.
Could be.
I see, mate, you've got to fold yourself in half just to get in the front of that one.
The first thing I noticed when I hopped in the car is that it's not in low range.
Even with Don's Hercules-like strength, he still can't free the Triton.
I might have to join two snatches together to get you out, Don.
Okay, here we go.
With Don's innate ability to sink the Triton in every bit of soft sand we come across, I'm pretty keen to see if it's the vehicle or the driver that's responsible. Here's my appraisal on both vehicles.
Decked out with all the TJM gear, this troop carrier is pretty much Arnold Schwarzenegger on wheels. It looks awesome, it sounds awesome, and it's every guy's dream vehicle. But if you were to drive one off the factory floor, they're definitely not without their faults. Toyota, in their infinite wisdom, decided to fit a V8 diesel that they already had in production. Now, there's a couple of limitations with that, one of which, with its standard body, it wasn't going to fit. So Toyota widened the front of the car. So now the front has a wheel track 100mm wider than at the rear. Now, that's not that big a deal, unless you consider the fact that this vehicle costs over $65,000 and Toyota couldn't even be bothered changing the rear end of it. Now, on the completely other side of the spectrum, you've got the Mitsubishi Triton with its cartoon comic looking exterior and an interior that matches.